I was sitting in a locked bathroom stall with my knees pulled to my chest, trying not to make a sound. Beyond the door, the briar room kept humming, silverware clicking, low laughter, the soft clink of crystal. A normal Thursday night in Georgetown, a room full of well-dressed people acting like nothing bad ever happens in places like this. Inside that stall, my mouth tasted like pennies and fear. My phone shook in my hand as I opened voice memos. I hit record. "If anything happens to me," I whispered, "it wasn't an accident. My name is Raven Grant. I'm 42. I'm at a business dinner with my husband, Donovan Grant, and two German men. And my husband just told them, in German, that he plans to kill me." I stopped and listened to my own breathing. For a second, the words sounded too unbelievable to belong to a real life, like something you'd hear on a podcast and think, that can't be true. But it was. We like to believe danger is obvious, that the worst people look dangerous, that evil has a warning label. It doesn't. Sometimes it wears a wedding ring. Sometimes it sleeps beside you. Sometimes it smiles at you across the kitchen island while it's quietly writing your ending. For 15 years, I believed my marriage was solid, real, earned, tested. Donovan and I weren't flashy. We were the couple people pointed to and said, "See, that's what grown-up love looks like." I believed him when he said he was proud of me. I believed him when he said we were building a future. Until one dinner split my life open. Donovan is a corporate attorney in DC, the kind who lives in conference rooms and private dining rooms. I'm a corporate finance director, the kind of woman who knows exactly what a dollar can do when it's aimed like a weapon. We live just outside the city, in a tidy neighborhood where people wave and talk about interest rates and retirement, like that's the biggest threat any of us will ever face. 2 days before the dinner, Donovan came home with that bright, practiced excitement he used when he wanted something. "Marcellus Miller is in town," he said. "German industrial money, expansion plans. If we land this account, it changes everything." He said it like a promise, like a blessing. "There's a dinner Thursday," he added. "They asked for spouses. They like stability." The word spouses landed heavy, but I didn't know why yet. I just nodded and asked what I should wear. Looking back, I replay the little things. How often he checked my schedule, how he'd been pushing more drinks on me lately, joking that I needed to relax, how suddenly he was eager to update life insurance and wills. At the time, I called it adulthood, planning, responsibility. Now I know it was groundwork. We drove into Georgetown just after 7. The streets were glossy from a light rain, lights smearing gold across the windshield. Donovan barely spoke. His jaw was tight. When I asked if he was okay, he said, "Just want everything perfect." He reached over and rested his hand on my thigh. Warm, familiar, but placed like a mark. The Briar Room was quiet luxury, dark wood, soft jazz, servers who moved like shadows. We were led into a private room where two men stood to greet us. Martellus Muller looked like the kind of man who'd never waited in line. Early 60s, silver hair, eyes sharp as a blade. Beside him, Darius Weber, mid-40s, athletic, blonde, gaze cool and measuring. Donovan stepped forward, all charm. Handshakes, smiles, compliments. Then he introduced me. I offered my hand. Marcellus kissed it, old world and deliberate. Darius shook my hand with a grip that was just a touch too firm. We sat. Wine arrived. Donovan ordered a bottle without looking at the price, and then, without asking, ordered me a martini. I started to protest, but he gave my knee a gentle squeeze under the table and said, "It's a celebration." I smiled and let it happen. For the first 20 minutes, everything stayed on the surface. Travel, weather, opportunities, polite questions about my work. Donovan laughed too loud and refilled glasses too often. Darius watched more than he spoke. Then Marcellus turned to Darius and spoke in German. Casual, almost bored. A remark about the steakhouse being fine but not like Frankfurt. Darius replied in German, joking about American portion sizes. They weren't just chatting, they were talking smack in another language, little insults dressed up as sophistication. They joked about soft Americans, about how our steaks were overcooked and our portions made us weak. I smiled like a polite hostess at my own table, while my mind translated every jab. It was the first warning. They felt safe here, with Donovan. I kept my face neutral. I smiled politely. I lifted my water glass like I didn't understand, because Donovan didn't know what I knew. He knew my mother was German. He knew I'd taken German classes. He thought I could stumble through ordering a beer in Munich, and that was it. He didn't know German was my first language. He didn't know my mother spoke it to me at home until I started school. He didn't know the language still lived in me like muscle memory. Husband didn't know I speak German. It wasn't something I'd ever needed to prove. It was just background, heritage, a private bond. But that night, it became the only reason I had warning. Donovan glanced at me, quick and casual, checking whether I looked confused. I smiled, reached for bread, and stayed in my role. The polished American wife, present, but not included. Satisfied, he joined their German conversation. His German was decent for business. Not elegant, not native, but clear enough. At first, they talked about harmless things. I let my shoulders ease, trying to believe I was imagining the tension. Then Marcellus swirled his wine and said, in German, "So, the timeline we discussed, are we still on track?" My fork paused for a heartbeat. Timeline. On track. Those words weren't about expansion plans. Donovan glanced at me again. I kept my eyes on my plate. He answered in German, calm as a man discussing billing hours. 6 more months, he said. Once the policy is beyond the contestability period, I can move forward. My mind scrambled for a harmless meaning. Policy, contestability, move forward, legal, business. Then he continued. I've already established the pattern of her heavy drinking, Donovan said, and I've begun documenting her instability. It will be tragic, but believable. My heart lurched like it had missed a step. He was talking about me. Marcellus nodded slowly. And the investigator? He asked in German. You are confident there will be no problems? No problems, Donovan replied. 2 million on her life, premiums paid. Nothing unusual for a couple our age. When it happens, it will look like an accident. High stress woman, drinking issue. One bad night. The room went too sharp, like reality had been turned up. I could see the seam of Donovan's cuff, the sheen on Marcellus's glass, the faint pulse at Darius's temple. Darius spoke, voice cool. Patience. Timing must be perfect, and you're certain she suspects nothing? Donovan laughed. She trusts me completely, he said. She's busy. She doesn't pay attention. She'll never see it coming. Never see it coming. My stomach dropped through the floor. I wanted to stand up and scream. I wanted to run. But survival doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a woman smiling politely while her life is being negotiated in another language. I curled my fingers into my napkin under the table to keep them steady. I forced my breathing to stay even. One thought stamped itself over and over in my mind. Don't let him know you understand. Because if Donovan realized I'd caught even one sentence, he wouldn't wait 6 months. He'd adjust. He'd accelerate. He'd make sure I never had time to warn anyone. Marcellus said something about being careful, about investigations. Darius murmured something that sounded like, no evidence. And Donovan answered like a man proud of his preparation. Then he said, in German, and Brielle has been incredible through all of this. Once it's done, we can finally be together openly. Brielle. Brielle Reynolds. The paralegal he mentioned like she was just a bright young professional. The name that had been sliding into our life like a slow leak. So he wasn't just planning to kill me. He was planning to replace me. I felt bile rise. My vision narrowed at the edges. The room smelled like steak and expensive wine, and suddenly, metal. I lifted my water glass with a steady hand that didn't feel like mine. I took a sip. I smiled faintly, like I was listening to a conversation in English I didn't care about. Then I pushed my chair back. Excuse me, I said in English, voice smooth. I need the ladies' room. Donovan turned to me with perfect concern, switching languages like flipping a light switch. You okay, babe? You look pale. Just the wine, I lied. I'll be right back. Take your time, he said, already turning away. I walked out of that private room on legs that felt like water. I moved through the restaurant past couples celebrating birthdays and anniversaries, people who still believed the world was reasonable. No one looked at me. No one knew that the woman in the navy dress had just heard her husband map out her death like a business plan. I reached the restroom, slipped into the furthest stall, and locked the door. That's when my body finally caught up to what my mind had heard. My hands started shaking. Tears came fast and hot. I pressed my fist to my mouth to keep the sound in. My husband is going to kill me, and he thinks I'm too oblivious to notice. I dragged in a breath, wiped my face with the back of my hand, and pulled out my phone. I hit record, because if I didn't, I knew I'd start doubting my own reality. And if you're still with me right now, I need you to stay. Because what I found later that night, on the device he brought into our home every day, proved this wasn't fantasy or bravado. It was a plan, a detailed one. So don't leave the screen yet. Tap like so this story reaches the people who need to hear it, and subscribe if you want more real-life stories about betrayal and survival. And in the comments, tell me what time you're watching and what city you're listening from, because the next part is where the mask really comes off. I made it back to that table like nothing had happened. That's the part people don't understand when they ask later. Why didn't you run? They imagine courage as a loud thing, shouting, storming out, throwing a drink in someone's face. But when you're sitting 3 feet from a man who's calmly pricing out your death, courage is quiet. It's measured. It's a woman smoothing her dress, fixing her lipstick, and walking back into a private dining room with a steady smile, because she knows the second she breaks character, she might not make it home. When I pushed open the door, Donovan looked up, his expression bright and easy, like the devoted husband of the year. There you are, he said. We were about to send out a search party. Marcellus Miller gave me a polite nod. Darius Weber's eyes flicked over my face, the way people do when they're deciding whether you're a problem. I'm fine, I lied. Just needed a moment. Donovan slid his hand onto my thigh under the table, warm, proprietary, and I forced myself not to flinch. I picked up my fork. I took a bite. I chewed. I swallowed. And while they talked about golf and synergies and international expansion in English again, my mind was somewhere else entirely. It was rewinding, replaying, cataloging. Because that's what my brain does. I'm a corporate finance director. My job is patterns, forecasts, risk. I build models that assume the world will behave a certain way, and then I stress test those models for what happens when it doesn't. That night, my marriage became the model, and the stress test said one thing over and over: danger. But to understand why I didn't bolt out of that steakhouse and never look back, you have to understand the life I thought I had. You have to understand the man I believed I married. And you have to understand the one piece of myself I'd always treated like background, something inherited, private, almost decorative, that suddenly became a weapon. So let me take you back, not all the way to childhood, but far enough to show you how carefully this was built. I met Donovan Grant when I was 27. I had just finished my MBA. I'd gone the practical route: numbers, strategy, corporate finance, because my father used to say, if you can read the money, you can read the truth. Money reveals what people really value and what they'll do when they think no one is watching. Back then, I was a rising analyst in the DC metro area, commuting into the city with the same hungry hope you see on 1,000 faces every morning. I was ambitious, yes, but I also wanted partnership. I wanted someone I could come home to who felt like a safe place. Donovan showed up at a professional networking mixer in a navy suit that fit him like it had been tailored to his ego. He was 3 years older than me, already an associate attorney at a high-powered corporate firm. He had that easy confidence that makes you think he knows something you don't. He didn't flirt like a teenager. He listened. He asked about my work, and when I answered, he didn't glaze over. He leaned in. He remembered details. He made me feel, at least in that moment, like my brain was attractive. By the end of the night, he'd walked me to my car and said, "I'd like to see you again, Raven." It was the way he said my name, like he was already claiming a future with me, that hooked something in my chest. We dated for 2 years. On the surface, it was the kind of relationship people respect. No chaos, dinners, weekend trips. He met my colleagues. I met his. We slowly merged lives like two companies preparing for a clean acquisition, and he was good at it. When my job got stressful, he brought dinner and sat with me while I worked late. When my mother visited from Germany, he tried to impress her with a few German phrases and warm smiles. My mother smiled, polite but sharp-eyed, the way German women can be. My mother, Denise Grant, was born and raised in Bavaria. Munich was her city, her rhythm. She met my father when he was stationed in Germany with the US Army. They fell in love fast and hard, the way people only do when they're young and far from home. When I was small, German was my first language. My mother spoke it to me like it was oxygen. Even after we moved to the States when I was 5, she kept German alive in the house. At school, I was American. At home, I was her daughter from Munich. I grew up translating without thinking, switching languages mid-sentence, catching jokes, idioms, the little meanings hidden between words. It wasn't a party trick. It was just me. Donovan knew my heritage. He knew my mother was German. He knew I'd kept up the language. But I never stood in front of him and said, "I'm fluent at a native level." It felt unnecessary, like bragging, and in a normal marriage it would have been. We got married when I was 29, a small, elegant ceremony. The kind of wedding where everyone leaves saying, they're solid. For years, our life ran like a well-managed portfolio. We bought a home outside the city, we built reputations. I rose through finance. Donovan climbed the law firm ladder, made partner, and learned to speak in that calm, convincing way that makes people relax. We talked about kids, someday. That word, someday, became a shelf we kept placing things on. Someday when work calms down. Someday when the timing is right. Around that time, my best friend Shanice Walker, my college roommate turned divorce attorney, started teasing me that Donovan was too polished. Shanice had a gift for hearing what people weren't saying. When she'd come over for Sunday coffee, she'd watch Donovan move around the kitchen, all smiles and perfect manners. And afterward, she'd whisper, "Girl, I can't tell if he's charming or rehearsed." I'd roll my eyes and laugh, because the truth was I liked the rehearsal. I liked predictability. Then Donovan began mentioning a paralegal named Brielle Reynolds. "Smart as a whip," he'd say, "keeps my cases organized." Nothing inappropriate on the surface, but her name came up too often, like a song stuck on repeat. Shanice noticed too. She didn't joke about that. "If you'd asked me 2 years ago if I trusted my husband, I would have looked you dead in the face and said, 'With my life.'" And that sentence still makes me shiver. The first crack appeared about 18 months before the dinner. It didn't show up as something dramatic. It showed up as interest. Donovan started asking about my schedule in a way that felt too detailed. Not just, "How was your day?" but, "When are you in the office? When are you working late? Are you traveling next week? Who's on that call?" At first, I told myself it was support. We were both in demanding careers. It made sense he'd want to know my calendar. But there was a sharpness to it, a focus, like he was building a map. Then there was the drinking. We had always enjoyed wine with dinner. But suddenly, Donovan was always offering, insisting. "Let me make you a martini," he'd say, like it was love. "You've earned it." If I hesitated, he'd laugh and say, "Come on, you work too hard, live a little." If I said no twice, he'd pour one anyway and slide it toward me like he was doing me a favor. At first, it felt like pampering. I had a stressful job. He was romantic. That's what I told myself. But looking back, I can see the pattern. He wanted me seen with a glass in my hand. He wanted stories where he could say, "Raven's been drinking more lately," and people would nod because they'd watched him refill my glass. He wasn't encouraging relaxation. He was building a narrative. Then came the insurance talk. About 14 months before the dinner, Donovan came home almost giddy about adulting. He said his firm had access to an incredible supplemental life insurance option. "We should do it," he said. "We're not getting any younger." It's smart. It protects our assets. And because I'm who I am, a woman who lives inside risk assessments, that made sense. It sounded responsible. It sounded like the kind of move you make when you're building a life together. I signed what I believed was paperwork. I barely remember it because it felt like routine. I didn't question him. This was my husband, a lawyer, a man who built his career on documents. And that's the irony, isn't it? The thing that kills you isn't always ignorance. Sometimes it's trust. After that, Donovan began to joke about accidents. If I stumbled on a rug, he'd laugh and say, "Careful, babe, you're getting clumsy." If I was tired, he'd say, "You need to slow down. Burnout is real." If I poured myself a glass of wine, he'd raise his brows and tease, "Is it one of those nights?" Each comment was light, playful, the kind of teasing couples do. But little by little, the message sank into the air around us. Raven drinks. Raven is stressed. Raven could have an accident. And I didn't see it, not then, because Donovan wasn't cruel in a way you can point to. He didn't scream. He showed up. He performed husbandhood like a role he'd perfected. Attentive, affectionate, proud. He brought me flowers. He rubbed my shoulders. He planned date nights. And that's what makes it so hard to explain. When someone is building a trap, they don't always look like a villain. Sometimes they look like a man bringing you pasta on a Tuesday and kissing your forehead like you're his favorite part of the day. Then, about 2 months before that dinner, he came home with news that sounded like a career highlight. "Marcellus Mueller is coming to DC," he said, pacing like he had electricity under his skin. "German industrial money, big expansion. The firm wants us to host them. And they requested spouses." I remember the way he said requested spouses, like it was normal, like it meant nothing. But there was something else in his voice that I couldn't name yet. Urgency, a kind of need. He kept checking with me over the next 48 hours. "You're sure you can make it Thursday? Nothing at work is going to come up? You won't need to cancel?" Each time I said, "I'll be there," I saw something flicker across his face. Not relief, not happiness, something closer to calculation. On Thursday, I chose a navy sheath dress, professional, clean lines, pearl earrings. I wanted to look like myself, capable, composed, the kind of woman who belongs in a room where deals are being made. Donovan told me I looked beautiful, but his voice was oddly flat. He adjusted his cufflinks like he was preparing for trial. On the drive in, he barely spoke. When I reached over to touch his knee, he covered my hand and squeezed it, then stared straight ahead as if he couldn't afford distraction. I should have known then that the stakes were higher than any contract, but I didn't, because I still believed in the version of him I'd married. And that's what made that moment at the dinner, the moment my husband started discussing my death in German, so violently unreal. Because to me, Donovan wasn't supposed to be a monster. He was supposed to be my partner, my safe place. So when you picture me walking back into that private dining room after locking myself in a bathroom stall, crying silently and recording proof that I wasn't losing my mind, understand this. I wasn't just walking back to a table. I was walking back into the ruins of everything I'd believed about my life. And I was doing it with my spine straight, because somewhere between the sink and the mirror, a colder part of me had risen up and taken the wheel. A part that understood one brutal truth. If I wanted to live, I had to act like I didn't know. Not yet. Not until I had enough to end him. So I smiled. I let Donovan refill my glass. I laughed at the right moments. I leaned into him like a wife in love. And in my head, I started building a new model, one that didn't assume the world was safe, one that assumed my husband was hunting me, and I was going to learn his pattern before he could finish the job. When I walked back into that private dining room, I had two versions of myself moving at the same time. One was the woman in the navy dress who smiled politely and slid into her chair like she'd simply stepped out to freshen up, the version everyone could see. The fine wife. The accomplished professional who knew how to keep a conversation light. The other version of me stayed in that bathroom stall, still shaking, still hearing Donovan's German like a blade dragged slowly across stone. 6 more months, contestability period, accident options. I sat down and smoothed my napkin across my lap, with hands that felt steady only because I refused to let them be anything else. Donovan's eyes swept my face, quick and clinical, searching for cracks. He was very good at reading people, how he won negotiations, how he cornered opponents. Now I understood it was also how he hunted. "There you are," Donovan said with an easy laugh. We were about to send out a search party. Marcellus Müller lifted his glass in a small, courteous salute. Darius Weber's gaze flicked over my face, the way people do when they're deciding whether you're a problem. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just needed a moment." Donovan's hand slid onto my thigh under the table. Warm, familiar, possessive. I forced myself not to flinch. The server arrived with our entrees, and my steak landed in front of me with a soft thud. Butter glistened on top. The smell should have been comforting. "Medium rare," Darius said in English, almost casually. "Donovan told us you prefer it that way." Donovan smiled. "I know my wife." I cut a small piece, placed it in my mouth, and chewed. The first swallow felt like swallowing gravel. The conversation returned to safe English topics: golf, travel, opportunities. I nodded at the right moments. I laughed once, a little too loud, on purpose. I needed them to see what Donovan wanted them to see. Raven, slightly tipsy, easy to underestimate. Donovan poured more wine, heavy-handed, into my glass. He paused a fraction, watching me. A test. I lifted the glass and took a slow sip, letting him see it, letting him believe his narrative was working. His mouth curled in satisfaction before he smoothed it back into charm. He wanted witnesses, a table full of people who could later say, "Yes, she'd been drinking. Donovan kept trying to take care of her." He was building my obituary in real time. Marcellus and Darius slipped into German again for a few sentences, and Donovan followed. I lowered my eyes to my plate like I was bored, like I didn't understand. They made small, sharp jokes about Americans, talking smack in another language the way people do when they feel untouchable. Marcellus complained about the restaurant being overpriced. Darius joked that we paid for the experience because we didn't have taste. I smiled politely at a joke I supposedly didn't hear. And then, between those jabs, the conversation darkened. Darius murmured something about Donovan's situation, and Donovan replied in German, low and tight. 300,000, he said, and the people who want it don't appreciate delays. My grip tightened on my fork. So, there were debts. Real pressure, not just greed. Desperation. Marcellus asked bluntly, "Gambling?" Donovan's laugh was humorless. "A mistake." Darius's voice stayed calm. "Mistakes can be fatal." I kept chewing. I kept breathing. I kept my face neutral. But my mind latched onto the only advantage I could see. Desperate people rush. They get sloppy. They leave fingerprints. The rest of the meal passed in a fog of forced laughter and silent math. I counted the sips. I watched Donovan's hands. The way he touched my back when the server came. The way he refilled my glass. The way he glanced at me whenever the German started. When he smiled at me, I smiled back like I was in love. When he asked if I wanted another drink, I said yes, and then I held it and took only small sips. I let him think I was drinking more than I was. Every move was a negotiation between my body's fear and my brain's strategy. A few times, Donovan forgot himself and drifted back into German, like a man showing off a trick. Each time, he checked me first. Quick glances, the kind you'd miss if you didn't know what you were looking for. I made sure he saw exactly what he expected. Mild boredom, polite distance, a wife focused on her plate. Marcellus asked, still in German, whether Donovan had chosen a method yet. The word he used, art, usually means type, but in his mouth it sounded like means, like a tool. Donovan answered, calm and conversational. Not yet. The stairs are a good option. Easy, common, a fall after wine, or a single vehicle accident, late at night, wet road, distraction. The key is plausibility. Darius added something that chilled me even more. Poisons are messy unless you are experienced, but a fall is clean. clean. They spoke about it like housekeeping. Marcellus chuckled and said he knew people who could advise on details: how to keep injuries consistent, how to avoid raising flags, how to speak to insurance investigators like a grieving spouse who simply wants answers. Connections, not business connections, the kind that operate in shadows. Donovan nodded like a student taking notes. "I'm careful," he said. "I'm documenting everything. I'm building the story." Building the story. That phrase burned into me, because I could suddenly see the finished product. Me as the unstable wife, me as the cautionary tale, Donovan as the devoted husband whose life was tragically shattered. And all of it would be believable if I played my part. So I did. When Donovan refilled my glass, I let my hand wobble slightly as I lifted it, the smallest hint of tipsy for anyone watching. I laughed too hard at a bland joke. I leaned my shoulder against Donovan's arm and said in a sweet voice, "You're so good at hosting," like I was proud of him. Under the table, his thumb drew circles on my thigh in approval. The more I performed, the safer I became, at least for that night. But inside, my body was doing something strange. The fear wasn't loud anymore. It was focused. It narrowed my attention until the world became details. Donovan's watch, Marcellus's cufflinks, the exact number of times Darius looked at the door. Because when you realize you're sitting with people who are discussing your murder, you start reading the room like a map of exits. By the time dessert came, my mouth was dry and my skin prickled like it was warning me of a storm. Marcellus stood first and thanked us for our hospitality. He kissed my hand again, slow and theatrical. "You are very charming," he said in English. "Your husband is fortunate." Darius shook my hand, eyes cold. "Lovely evening." Donovan clapped both men on the shoulders, promised to be in touch, promised to keep them updated. Updated, as if my life were a project plan. We walked out into the damp night. Streetlights glowed in the rain. Donovan held the car door open for me like a gentleman, the kind of gesture strangers admire, the kind of ritual that makes people think, "He's a good one." I slid into the passenger seat and stared at my hands. As he drove, Donovan reached over and took my hand. His fingers threaded through mine, warm and familiar, a gesture that used to calm me. That night it felt like a cuff. "Thank you for tonight," he said softly. "You were perfect. Perfect." That word landed like a trap snapping shut. "I'm glad it went well," I said, voice steady. He glanced at me, eyes shining with something I didn't want to name. "You know I love you, right?" he said. Those words. I stared out at the blur of Georgetown passing by and felt my throat close. "I love you too," I whispered, because what else could I say with a man like Donovan holding my hand? The ride home felt longer than the drive in. Every red light felt like a chance for him to change his mind. Every dark side street felt like a place he could turn the wheel and make an accident happen early. Donovan kept talking, easy and buoyant, like a man riding a win. He praised Marcellus's vision, joked about German efficiency, and kept returning to how big this account could be. But woven through his words were tiny rehearsals, little lines he could later repeat to anyone. "You were quiet tonight," he said at one point, still smiling. "I hope you weren't bored." "Oh, no," I said quickly. "I just had a long week." He squeezed my hand. "You had a lot of wine. I kept thinking I should cut you off, but you looked so happy. You deserved it." There it was again, him planting it softly, like a seed. I let out a small laugh. "I'm fine, Donovan. You worry too much." He seemed pleased with that answer. A man like him wants his version of reality confirmed. He needs you to help him build it. As we pulled into our neighborhood, he slowed at every stop sign, almost exaggeratedly careful, like he was showing the universe how responsible he was. I watched the dashboard clock and tried not to imagine 6 months from now, a different night, a different drive, the same careful hands on the steering wheel, only this time guiding me toward a ditch. When we turned into our driveway, my stomach clenched so hard it hurt. I reminded myself, not tonight. He said 6 months. He needs the policy past the contestability period. He needs time. But a plan can change, a man can improvise. That was the truth that sat behind my ribs like a stone. When we got home, the house was quiet and dark. Donovan poured himself a drink and poured one for me without asking, setting it in front of me like an expectation. "I'm exhausted," I said quickly. "I should go to bed." He stepped behind me and kissed the back of my neck. "We didn't get much time together today," he murmured. My stomach twisted. He wanted sex, another performance, another way to keep me close, another future story he could tell as the grieving husband. That night, I closed my eyes and did what I had to do to keep him from suspecting anything. I let him touch me. I let him whisper my name. My mind stayed awake, cold and sharp, counting breaths, counting the seconds until it was over. Afterward, Donovan fell asleep almost immediately, satisfied. I lay in the dark with his arm draped across my waist like a heavy chain. The man who had promised to protect me now slept as peacefully as a child because he believed his plan was perfect. Around 2 a.m, when I was sure he was deep asleep, I carefully slid out from under his arm. He didn't stir. He always slept hard after wine and sex, like the dead. I padded across the bedroom, quiet as a shadow, and picked up his briefcase. Donovan's laptop was inside. I carried it down the hall to the guest bathroom, shut the door, and locked it. I set the laptop on the closed toilet lid and opened it. I knew his password. We'd always shared passwords, another ritual of trust. I typed it in and waited for the screen to glow. For a moment, everything looked normal. Work emails, a few documents, calendar reminders. I searched his folders, heart pounding, and found nothing. Then I remembered what he'd said at dinner, documenting my instability. So I typed my name into the search bar. A folder appeared buried among harmless labels, not hidden in any sophisticated way, just sitting there like a snake in tall grass. The folder name, Insurance. My breath caught. I clicked it. Inside were dozens of files, and they were all about me. The first document was a typed timeline, date-stamped entries describing my episodes. Raven appeared intoxicated. It claimed about a night I'd had a single glass of wine. Raven became emotionally unstable, it said about a normal venting conversation. It was written in Donovan's calm, clinical tone, like a lawyer preparing a case, except the case was my death. The files weren't random. They were categorized the way he categorized everything. There was a folder labeled Witness. Inside were draft statements, people's names typed at the top like placeholders. Neighbor observed Raven intoxicated, one read. Coworker noted erratic mood swings, another claimed. Some were half-finished, as if he planned to fill them in later when he decided who he needed. A folder labeled Medical contained articles about blood alcohol levels, interactions between alcohol and common medications, and a few bookmarked pages about symptoms that could be mistaken for intoxication. I realized then he wasn't just framing me as a drinker, he was designing explanations for every possible question. There was even a document titled 911 Call, a script, line by line. Operator, I think my wife fell. She's been drinking. She said she was fine. Please hurry. I stared at it until my vision blurred, because it was so intimate in its cruelty. He had rehearsed the sound of being devastated. Another file listed, Grief Timeline. The words made my skin crawl. It outlined what he should do after my death. Take leave from work. Public memorial service. Appear distraught but composed. Mention her stress. Mention her drinking. Mention how you tried to help. He wasn't only planning to kill me. He was planning to be adored afterward. I clicked another file and felt my stomach drop. Fake journal entries, written in the first person as if I had authored them. I feel like I can't go on. Sometimes I think everyone would be better off without me. I had never written those words. I had never thought those words. Donovan had created a version of me, depressed, unstable, self-destructive. So when I died, people could say, "We had no idea." But maybe she was struggling. Another folder contained photos of me holding wine glasses at parties, laughing at dinners, sitting on our couch with a drink in my hand, framed so I looked heavy-lidded, sloppy, unsteady. Photos don't show context. They show what the photographer wants you to see, and Donovan had been taking pictures of me like evidence. Then I opened a document that made my blood run cold. A list of Google searches. How to stage an accidental fall. Undetectable poisons delayed onset. Life insurance investigation procedures, contestability period. Do stair accidents trigger insurance fraud investigations? The words glowed on the screen like a confession. My husband wasn't fantasizing. He was researching, planning, learning. I scrolled and found PDFs saved from articles, notes copied and pasted, and, of course, an organized checklist with dates, a murder manual. I leaned back against the bathroom wall, dizzy, and pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from making a sound. The man asleep down the hall had built my death like a project. I forced myself to move. Fear without proof is just terror. Proof is power. I opened a file labeled Policy. There it was, a $2 million life insurance policy on me. Beneficiary, Donovan Grant. My signature at the bottom. It wasn't mine. It was close, too close, like someone had practiced until the loops and slants matched. He forged it. I grabbed my phone and started taking photos of everything. File names, dates, pages, signatures. I made sure the policy number showed. I photographed the signature close-up. Click, click, click. My phone's shutter was on silent, but each tap sounded loud in my head. Then I found an email account logged in under a fake name. The inbox was a minefield. Messages to Brielle Reynolds, hundreds of them. Not subtle, not cautious. Only 8 months until we're free, one said. Only 7 more months until our life begins. They were counting down to my death like it was a wedding date. Attachments followed. House listings, kitchen photos, backyard pools, a fresh start. There were also messages to Marcellus, business on the surface, but coded. The project is progressing. We remain aligned on timeline. All documents will be in order. After what I'd heard in German, I could read it like it was written in bold. My murder was the project. My life was the timeline. My death was progress. I felt rage rise so clean and hot it burned through the fear. For a second, I understood how people snap. But rage is loud. Rage is messy. I couldn't afford messy. So I kept taking photos. Then I remembered what men like Donovan do when they think they're clever. They don't keep everything in one place. They create backups, separate channels. I slipped out of the bathroom, laptop in my hands, and crept to the mudroom where his gym bag sat by the garage door. He always dropped it there. Always. I unzipped it and found it near the bottom, a cheap prepaid phone, a burner. I checked the battery level before I touched anything else. 62%. I memorized it. I didn't want Donovan to come home later, pick it up, and notice it had been on longer than usual. The contacts list was short, mostly numbers with nicknames. B. M. D. K. It was like a child labeling monsters with single letters. I photographed that too, because initials can become names once investigators start pulling records. Even the call log told a story. Long calls late at night, short calls right after Donovan met with Marcellus and Darius, a pattern that matched the rhythm of planning. And one more thing, there were voice notes. Not many, but one short recording, saved with no title, just a date. I didn't play it. Not then. I couldn't risk the sound leaking through the house. I just photographed the file name and timestamp, knowing I'd need it later, knowing Shanice would know what to do with it. No passcode, because who would ever look? I powered it on and opened the messages. Brielle. The thread was a sick mix, explicit fantasies and then cold logistics that made my blood freeze. When you do it, she had typed, make sure you're somewhere public with witnesses. And call 911 immediately. You need to seem devastated. Donovan replied, I'm a lawyer, babe. I know how to play the grieving husband. By the time I'm done, everyone will feel sorry for me. Poor Donovan, losing his troubled wife. Cheating husband caught didn't even begin to cover it. This wasn't an affair. This was a partnership in murder. I took photos of every message, every contact, every call log. In the Notes app, I found a list, dates and places, hiking trails, staircases, intersections with bad lighting, options, written like a man shopping. I put the burner phone back exactly where I found it, down to the angle it sat in his bag. I zipped the bag. Then I returned to the bathroom and opened my own laptop. I created a new cloud storage account under a name Donovan would never guess. I uploaded every photo I'd taken, policies, files, texts, emails, multiple folders, multiple backups. Then I sent a secure link to Shanice Walker with one short message. This is everything. If I die, give it to the police. It wasn't an accident. My finger hovered over send for half a second, the old part of me whispering, maybe this can't be real. But the forged signature was real. The search history was real. The burner phone was real. I pressed send. The message whooshed away into the night, and for the first time since dinner, I felt something besides fear. Control. That tiny feeling didn't mean I was brave. It meant I had a lever. In finance, leverage is what turns a small move into a major shift. A little information in the right hands can topple a giant. Donovan thought he held all the cards, but now I quietly at last had a copy of his deck, and I'd slipped one card to someone outside the game. I shut down Donovan's laptop and returned it to his briefcase in the exact position it had been. I didn't delete anything. Deletion looks suspicious. I just closed Windows, left everything as he'd expect. I washed my hands at the sink, scrubbing as if I could scrub off what I'd seen. When I climbed back into bed, Donovan didn't move. He snored softly, arm reaching for me in his sleep, still convinced he was safe. I lay beside him and stared at the ceiling. Now I knew two things with absolute certainty. 1. Donovan was going to kill me if I didn't stop him. 2. Donovan still believed he was the only one in the house with secrets. Husband didn't know I speak German. He didn't know I had heard him. He didn't know I had seen his files. He didn't know I had copied his entire plan and handed it to someone who loved me. That night, I didn't pray for mercy. I made a quieter, harder promise. This would become a wife revenge story, but not the kind with screaming and shattered plates. Mine would be silent, legal, precise. And it would start with one simple thing. I would not let him see me flinch. The next morning, Donovan kissed my cheek and said, "Morning, babe," like he hadn't spent the night with a woman he planned to bury. He poured coffee, smiled, and asked, "How are you feeling? You had a lot of wine last night." There it was, his narrative, already being rehearsed. "I'm fine," I said lightly, forcing a laugh. "Just tired." He looked satisfied, like my answer confirmed everything he wanted. He left with his briefcase and his perfect lawyer grin. The door clicked shut. I stood alone in my kitchen, staring at the spot where his lips had touched my forehead, and my knees went weak. The danger wasn't coming. It was already here. I picked up my phone and called Shanice. She answered on the first ring, voice tight. "Raven?" "I need you," I said. "I'm coming to your office. I can't explain on the phone." A beat of silence, then her voice turned into steel. "Okay, right now." I grabbed my keys and my purse. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't take anything that would look like leaving. Because the second I changed my routine, Donovan would feel it. And a man like him can't stand unpredictability. As I drove toward the city, my hands locked around the steering wheel, one thought kept pulsing through me like a warning light. Stay alive. Stay normal. Stay quiet. And whatever you do, don't let him know you're listening. Traffic moved like it always does. Slow, impatient, ordinary. People sipped coffee at red lights. A man in a pickup truck scrolled on his phone. A woman in a minivan sang along to the radio. The normal world continued, completely unaware that in my passenger seat, in my purse, on my phone, I carried proof that my own husband had been drafting my death. I checked my rearview mirror too often. Every dark sedan behind me looked suspicious. Every time someone followed through 2 turns, my heart spiked. I reminded myself, Donovan thinks I'm at work. He thinks my routine is unchanged. Still, fear makes you imagine footsteps where there are none. When I reached Shanice's building, I parked in a visitor spot like I had 100 times before. My hands wouldn't release the steering wheel. I sat there for one extra breath, staring at the entrance. Then I stepped out and walked inside. The lobby smelled like polished stone and someone's expensive cologne. The security guard nodded at me, friendly. I nodded back, trying to look normal. Trying to look like a woman headed to a meeting, not a woman carrying evidence of a murder conspiracy. The elevator felt too slow. The numbers above the door crawled upward. When the doors opened on Shanice's floor, she was already there, standing near the reception desk, eyes locked on me. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just held her posture like a shield. And as I walked toward her, I realized something that made my throat tighten again. The most dangerous part wasn't the dinner. The most dangerous part was what came next. What happens when you decide to fight back against the person who knows your routines, your habits, your weaknesses, against the person who sleeps beside you and thinks you'll never see it coming? I reached Shanice, and she took one look at my face and said quietly, "Raven, tell me you're not alone in this." I swallowed hard. "I'm here," I said, "and I'm still alive, for now." And then I began to tell her everything. Shanice didn't let me collapse. She didn't let me sit in her office and spiral into what-ifs and panic. She closed the blinds, turned the white noise machine on, slid a box of tissues across her desk, and said, "Start at the dinner, give me the facts, then we'll deal with the feelings." So I did. I told her about the private room at the Breyer Room, about Marcellus Miller's hand kiss, about Darius Weber's cold eyes, about Donovan switching into German like it was a locked door he thought I couldn't open. And I repeated the words I'd heard exactly as he'd said them: 6 months, contestability period, accident options, heavy drinking narrative, the plan to be the grieving husband. When I got to Brielle Reynolds, when I said her name out loud, my voice cracked anyway. Not because I missed Donovan, because betrayal is a special kind of humiliation. It makes you feel foolish for believing in something you built with your own hands. Shanice's face had gone still, the way it does when she's in court and someone tries to lie to her. "Do you have proof?" she asked. I unlocked my phone and handed it to her. Photos, files, emails, texts, a forged policy, a burner phone. She scrolled, and her eyes hardened with every swipe. When she reached the document titled 911 Call, she stopped. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she looked up and said, "Raven, this man is not playing. This is a conspiracy, and you are not sleeping in that house tonight." My throat tightened. "If I disappear," I whispered, "he'll know. He'll move faster. He'll make it look like I ran off or had a breakdown. I can't give him a reason to change the timeline." Shanice leaned forward. "You're asking me to help you keep living with a man who wants you dead." "I'm asking you," I said, voice low, "to help me make sure he can't do it." She stared at me like she was measuring whether I'd snapped. Then she picked up her phone and made one call, no hesitation. "Monique," she said when the other line answered, "I've got a client in my office who needs you right now. No, not divorce. Criminal. And it's ugly." That's how Monique Ellis entered my story. She arrived 40 minutes later, calm as a surgeon, mid-40s, hair pulled back, suit sharp enough to cut glass. She didn't waste time on sympathy because she knew sympathy can soften a person when they need to be steel. She sat across from me, folded her hands, and said, "Tell me what you heard, what you have, and what you've done so far." I told her everything again. The German conversation, the bathroom recording, the midnight search through Donovan's files, the cloud backups, the messages to Shanice, the burner phone, the fake journal entries. Monique listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded once. Precise. "This is strong," she said. "The forged signature alone is fraud. The texts and the planning documents suggest intent. The problem is what a defense attorney will argue, that Donovan was talking, fantasizing, blowing off steam, that he never took a step toward execution. My stomach lurched. So I'm supposed to wait for him to try? No, Monique said, and her voice left no room for argument. You're supposed to live long enough for law enforcement to catch him taking a step. We can involve federal agents because of the international peace, Miller and Weber. If those men have organized crime connections, this moves beyond a local domestic case. I stared at her. He said he had connections. He said, I believe you, she cut in. But belief isn't evidence. Evidence is what gets a warrant. Evidence is what survives court. Monique pushed a notepad toward me. Here's what we do. We contact the FBI, quietly. We hand them the files. We let them open an investigation. They will get legal taps, surveillance, financial tracking. And you, she said, holding my gaze, keep acting normal. Before we made a single call, Monique had me do something I wouldn't have thought of. She asked me to open the voice memo I'd recorded in the bathroom and play it in her office. Hearing my own whisper, shaky, terrified, but specific, did something strange. It grounded me. It turned the nightmare into a timeline with a date, a place, and names. Monique nodded as it played, then said, Good. That's contemporaneous. It shows fear, yes, but it also shows detail. A jury understands detail. Shanice poured me water and made me drink it. No more wine tonight, she muttered. Not until you're out of this. Monique slid a legal pad across the desk and started listing what mattered. Forged signature, financial motive, international contacts, communications with Brielle, the 911 call script, the fake journal entries. This isn't just a cheating husband caught, she said, eyes steady on mine. This is intent plus preparation. The only thing missing is overt action. That's what law enforcement will be watching for. Then she looked at Shanice. You're going to draft an emergency protective order request and a divorce filing package, but we don't file yet. Filing is a flare gun. We keep it ready, but we don't fire it until the agents tell us the net is tight. Shanice's mouth set into that stubborn line I'd seen 100 times. I hate this, she said. So do I, Monique replied. But we're choosing the move that keeps Raven alive and makes the case stick. When we finally left Shanice's office, the hallway outside felt too bright, too normal. I remember pausing at the elevator doors, smoothing my dress, and thinking, this is what survival looks like, looking like nothing is wrong while everything is wrong. Shanice squeezed my hand once, hard. Call me if he so much as breathes funny, she said, and my eyes burned. I will, I promised. And if I don't, check the cloud. Everything's there. Shanice let out a breath like she'd been holding it for years. Can she get protection? She can, Monique said, but protection can spook him. If he senses a shift, if he senses Raven knows, he speeds up. He gets creative. He takes risks. My hands were cold. So I go home. Monique didn't sugarcoat it. You go home, and we build a case around you. That afternoon felt like stepping into a hallway where every door led to danger. But I agreed because the alternative was worse. Running with nothing but fear and hoping a man like Donovan wouldn't chase. By nightfall, I was back in my own kitchen, watching Donovan chop garlic like he was a loving husband in a cooking show. He kissed me. How was your day, babe? Busy, I said, the most ordinary lie. He poured wine. He always poured wine. Relax, he said, smiling. You've earned it. I lifted the glass, took a sip, and let him see it. Inside, I counted. 1 sip, 2 sips. Stop. I set it down and ate slowly, letting my body stay clear. Over the next 3 weeks, my life became a performance so constant, it started to feel like a second skin. Every morning, I woke up next to Donovan and kept my face soft. I let him wrap an arm around me. I let him kiss my shoulder. I let him say things like, we're so lucky, and I don't know what I'd do without you. And every time he said it, I heard the unspoken ending, you won't be here. The FBI moved quietly. I never spoke to them directly in my house. Monique was the bridge. She'd call me from a secure line and give me only what I needed to know. They verified Mueller, she told me one evening. There are connections. We're coordinating. Another time, they have enough for surveillance. Then, a week later, they have recorded conversations between Donovan and Brielle. I asked what Donovan was saying. Monique's pause told me more than her words. He's confident, she said. He's discussing the plan like it's inevitable. At home, Donovan grew more affectionate the closer we got. He bought flowers. He suggested a weekend in the mountains. He made a point of holding my hand in public, building his image, but he also started testing the edges. One night I found a small box placed at the top of our stairs, in the exact spot I always stepped. A careless mistake, you'd think. Except Donovan is not careless. He caught me when I nearly stumbled. His hands closed around my arms, steady and strong. Whoa, he laughed. Careful, babe. You've been drinking too much lately. His tone was joking. His eyes were not. Later, he kissed my forehead and said, I worry about you. That night I lay awake and listened to his breathing, wondering if I'd just survived a rehearsal. Then came the paperwork push. Over breakfast one Tuesday, Donovan said, casual as if discussing groceries, we should update our wills. Make sure beneficiaries are current. Adult stuff. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I smiled. You're right, I said lightly. Work's been insane, though. Can we do it next month? His jaw tightened, just a flicker, before he smoothed his face. Of course, he said. No rush. But he brought it up again 3 days later, and again the following week, each time I stalled, each time his irritation surfaced faster. He needed my signature on something. He needed the story locked down. And because I wouldn't give it to him, his patience began to thin. Monique called me on a Wednesday afternoon, her voice crisp. We're close. How close? I asked. 1 week, she said. Can you hold the line for 1 more week? I looked at Donovan across the living room, laughing at something on TV, feet propped on the coffee table like he didn't have a murder manual on his laptop. I can hold, I said. I'm already holding. That last week was the longest of my life. I slept in fragments. I jumped at the sound of his footsteps. I checked my brakes twice before I drove. I memorized the feel of every doorknob, every latch, because paranoia makes your home feel like a trap. Donovan watched me more too. Not constantly, just enough to remind me who controlled the routine. Then, on Thursday morning, 4 weeks to the day since that dinner, Monique called. It's happening today, she said. Donovan will be arrested at his office, Brielle at her apartment. Mueller and Weber are being handled overseas. You need to be somewhere safe and public. I want to see him, I said, and the words came out before I could second-guess them. I need to see his face. Monique exhaled. Raven. I need it, I repeated. I need him to understand I wasn't the clueless wife he planned to erase. Silence. Then, okay, but you will be behind glass, with agents. An hour later, I sat in a borrowed office across the street from Donovan's building, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee I couldn't drink. 2 agents stood nearby, quiet, respectful, watching the entrance on a live feed. On the screen, Donovan appeared in the lobby at 9:27, smooth and confident, suit perfect, briefcase in hand. He was talking to someone on his phone, smiling, the picture of a man with control. At 9:30, 6 agents walked in. Even through a camera, you could feel the temperature shift. Donovan's smile faltered. His body stiffened. He tried to speak, lawyer instincts kicking in. But one of the agents produced a warrant and his words died in his throat. Confusion flickered into disbelief, then into fear so sharp it changed his face. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. For a second, he looked down at them like they belonged to someone else, like reality had made a clerical error. Then they escorted him out. Outside, reporters were already gathering. Someone had tipped them. Cameras rose like weapons. Donovan's head jerked, searching the street, searching the windows, hunting for the story he could control. And then his eyes found mine. Not because he knew I was there, because a man like Donovan always looks for the witness. He always needs to know who is watching. Our gaze locked through the glass. I didn't smile big. I didn't wave. I just let my mouth curve slightly, a private, precise victory. And I mouthed 2 words in German. Ich verstehe. I understand. I watched the realization strike him like a blow. His face drained of color. His eyes widened, not with anger, but with panic. Because in that instant, everything he'd built collapsed. The lies, the narrative, the perfect plan. He finally understood the truth that made all the difference. He had been talking smack in another language, and the wife he underestimated heard every word. The agents guided him into the car. The door shut. The engine started. Donovan's eyes never left my window until the vehicle pulled away. And only when it disappeared down the street did I realize I'd been holding my breath for a month. I exhaled, long and shaking, and felt something in my chest loosen, like a knot finally cut. Everything had a reason. My mother insisting on German at home. Donovan never asking how fluent I truly was. That dinner in Georgetown. My decision to play the role instead of running. The meticulous files he created to trap me became the evidence that trapped him. Instant karma doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it arrives with handcuffs at 9:30 a.m. and a woman behind glass who finally gets to breathe. When the car carrying Donovan Grant disappeared into morning traffic, I stayed at that window longer than I needed to. Not because I was afraid he'd come back. Not because I wanted to keep watching him fall. Because my body didn't know what to do with safe yet. For weeks, I had lived like a person holding her breath underwater, measuring every move, every word, every sip, every smile. I'd slept beside a man who had rehearsed my funeral. I'd eaten dinner across from him while he quietly wrote my ending in his head. And now, suddenly, there was silence. No performance required, no pretending, no calculating whether a question was a test. Just a quiet room, a pale winter sun, and my own heartbeat finally allowed to be loud. One of the agents asked me if I needed to sit down. I did. My legs had turned to rubber. I lowered myself into a chair and stared at my hands as if I'd never seen them before. They were still. They weren't shaking. That felt like a miracle. Monique Ellis met me later that afternoon. She didn't celebrate because she understood what my win really was. Not triumph, but survival. They've got him, she said. They've got enough. And they've got Brielle. There will be hearings. There will be noise. But you're out of immediate danger. Out of immediate danger. I nodded like I understood, but the truth was, my brain was still stuck in the old rhythm. Even in a safe office, I kept listening for footsteps. I kept expecting Donovan to walk in smiling and say, "Babe, what's wrong? You look pale." I didn't go home that night. Shanice insisted I stay with her. She didn't ask. She told me. She made up the guest room with clean sheets, put a glass of water on the nightstand, and then sat on the edge of the bed like an older sister who decided she would not leave me alone with my thoughts. "You did everything right," she said. I shook my head. I didn't even know I was in a war until I was already on the battlefield. Shanice's eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. "And you still won." The legal process didn't wrap up neatly in a week the way TV shows pretend it does. It dragged. Donovan tried to play the same game he always played, denial dressed in logic. He told his attorney it was misunderstood, that he was venting, that he'd never actually intended to hurt me. A man like Donovan believes words can shape reality if he says them cleanly enough. But the evidence didn't care about his tone. The forged insurance policy, the fake journal entries, the 911 call script, the burner phone, the texts with Brielle Reynolds about witnesses and acting devastated, the searches, the payments disguised as consultations, the recorded conversations, the file labeled grief timeline, like my death was just a brand strategy. It was too much, too organized, too intentional. In the end, even his lawyers knew a trial would be a public execution of his reputation. So he took a plea deal. 20 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and solicitation. He'd be eligible for parole later, years later. Old enough that the life he'd imagined with Brielle would be a faded fantasy by the time he saw the outside again. Brielle cooperated. She didn't do it out of conscience. She did it out of self-preservation, the way people do when the dream turns into a cell. She got less time, but she didn't walk free. And as for Marcellus Muller and Darius Weber, the international pieces snapped into place. When your life almost becomes a project with men like that, you learn how big the world is and how quickly it can shrink when authorities decide to close the net. Donovan's law license was revoked. The partner title he'd worn like armor evaporated. His colleagues stopped calling. The firm released statements. Friends who toasted him at parties pretended they'd never liked him. That was his punishment in public. Mine happened in private, because once the adrenaline wears off, you don't just return to who you were before. You're changed. Your body remembers even when your mind is trying to move on. I filed for divorce while he sat in a detention facility waiting for sentencing. Shanice handled it like she was cutting a tumor out of my life. I didn't ask for mercy. I didn't negotiate for fair. I wanted clean separation. I wanted every legal tie severed. We divided assets. Accounts were traced, papers were signed. There was no dramatic courtroom scene. Just signatures, stamps, and the quiet satisfaction of watching his access to my life disappear, line by line. I didn't want money that felt like blood, but I also refused to walk away empty-handed when he'd tried to turn me into a payout. So I took what was mine, what I had earned and built, and I left him with the consequences of his own greed. 2 years have passed since that morning across the street from his office. I'm 44 now. I live in a condo with big windows and clean lines, closer to the city than the house I shared with Donovan, but it's smaller, and it's mine. All mine. No echoes of him in the hallway. No memories trapped in the walls. I'm still a corporate finance director, still good at what I do. But I also started a small consulting practice on the side, helping women understand the numbers behind their lives. Not just budgets, ownership, beneficiaries, policies, the paperwork people sign without reading because they trust the person who slid it across the table. Because I learned the hard way. Love doesn't protect you from fraud. Marriage doesn't protect you from manipulation. You protect you. I'm in therapy. PTSD, they call it. Some nights I wake up convinced I can hear Donovan's footsteps, even though I know he's locked behind steel doors. I flinch when someone touches me unexpectedly. I still scan rooms for exits like it's a reflex. But I'm healing. Slowly. Honestly. The kind of healing that doesn't look pretty, but looks real. My mother, Denise, came and stayed with me after it happened. We spoke German more than we had in years, and for the first time in my life, I felt grateful for that language in a way that went beyond heritage. It wasn't just a piece of my past. It was the skill that saved my life. I never visited Donovan in prison. I never took his calls. I never accepted official letters. There is nothing he could say that would rewrite what he chose. But about 6 months ago, a letter reached me anyway, smuggled out, bypassing official channels, like he still believed rules didn't apply to him. 3 pages of apologies and explanations. He claimed he was desperate. He claimed it was fantasy. He claimed he still loved me. I read it once, and then I laughed. One short, bitter laugh. Because even then, even after prison and handcuffs and headlines, he still didn't understand. He thought words could bend me. So I drove to a public park where they have those metal fire pits, and I burned it. I watched the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash, and it felt like watching the last thread between us finally dissolve. That night I went home, poured myself a single glass of wine, just one because I'm careful now, and sat by my window looking out at the city lights. I thought about that moment at dinner. Donovan's voice in German, confident and careless. She'll never see it coming. And I smiled, not because I enjoy pain, but because I enjoy truth. I did see it coming. And I am still here. If this story hit you in the chest, if it made you think, if it made you uneasy, if it made you want to double-check your own paperwork or pay closer attention to the subtle shifts in someone you trust, Please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next story. Hit like so the algorithm carries this to someone who might need it. And leave a comment with your honest take. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have run, or would you have stayed and built the case? And when this video ends, tap the end screen to watch another story from this channel. Because the truth is, monsters don't always look like monsters. And the more we talk about that, the harder it gets for them to hide.